My wife's scream detonated across the neighborhood like a signal flare, slicing straight through the morning calm and telling me instantly that the HOA cult had crossed their final line. I stepped out the front door and froze. Not because I was scared, but because the scene in front of me deserved the kind of silence that comes right before someone gets destroyed. 2 fake cops, uniformed parasites with counterfeit badges, had each of her arms locked in their fists. They dragged her backward like stolen property, their boots grinding her heels across the pavement as she fought them, breath cracking, voice shredding as she shouted for them to let her go. And still they tightened their grip. Still they smirked. Still they acted like this street belonged to them. I said, "Let her go," but they didn't even look at me. They didn't loosen, didn't pause, didn't acknowledge the trespassing violation they were committing. They kept hauling her like they'd been waiting for this moment, like touching her would somehow impress Karen Whitmore, the power-drunk overlord who sent them. My jaw locked hard, my shoulders tightened, my hands curled. I walked forward slowly, wearing nothing but jeans and a Navy SEAL shirt from my morning run, and every inch of ground between me and them carried a warning they were too stupid to read. One of the fakes finally glanced at me. He smirked. The other chuckled under his breath like this was routine for them. They had no idea who I was, no idea who she was, no idea what kind of man Karen's delusion had just unleashed into their morning. Before I move forward, drop a comment. Where are you watching from right now? And don't forget to tell me in the comments if HOA cults like this operate in your area, because trust me, they hide everywhere. But that's not even the half of it. These 2 idiots, their hands bruising her skin, their boots scraping her across asphalt, didn't understand that every step I took toward them shortened the time they had left to breathe without pain. They didn't understand that they'd poked the wrong woman in the wrong neighborhood with the wrong husband watching. And here's where everything blew apart. My wife screamed again as one of them jerked her arm upward, twisting her like a suspect in some imaginary HOA crime. Her voice cracked, her feet skidded, her body jerked sideways. That moment lit every fuse I had. But I stayed calm, controlled, focused. That's what scared them. The one on her left growled, "Back off, tough guy. HOA security. Official business." Official business. That was the moment I knew Karen had completely lost her mind. Karen Whitmore, clipboard tyrant, porch-stalking surveillance creep, the self-declared queen of this HOA, had finally escalated from petty harassment to full-scale home invasion behavior. She sent these wannabe enforcers to snatch my wife off the street. She wanted her removed from the HOA presidency race. She wanted intimidation to do what her failing popularity couldn't. And these idiots followed her order like obedient cult disciples. The one gripping her right arm leaned closer, breath sour. "Karen says she's done campaigning today." My wife fought them harder, twisting, thrashing, voice ripping out. "You can't touch me! I'm running for president!" They ignored her. They thought those fake tactical vests made them untouchable. They thought the word HOA made them the law. They thought I would stand here helpless and watch. They thought wrong. I stepped into the center of the street. The breeze pushed at my shirt, running over muscles carved from years of breaking men overseas. "Let her go." They finally turned. One lifted his chin like authority lived in his neck. "Walk away," he said. "HOA business." Wrong sentence, wrong day, wrong man. I cracked my knuckles slowly. "Wrong neighborhood," I said. "Wrong woman." My eyes hardened. Wrong husband. And they had no idea what was coming next. Before the street turned into a battlefield, before Karen Whitmore unleashed her fake enforcers on my wife, this neighborhood had been quiet. Normal. 3 years of peace. 3 years without HOA parasites breathing down our necks. 3 years where rules were enforced with fairness instead of ego. That was because our old HOA president, Mr. Turner, wasn't a tyrant. He wasn't a surveillance creep lurking behind shrubs. He wasn't a petty overlord sniffing for power. He was balanced, strict when needed, fair always. He kept the HOA cult tendencies buried, kept the board from mutating into a pack of clipboard wolves hungry for control, and then he died. Suddenly, unexpectedly. And the neighborhood changed overnight. The moment his obituary hit inboxes, you could feel the shift. The board members who had spent years pretending to be civil suddenly started circling the empty presidency seat like vultures who'd been starving. And leading the charge was Karen Whitmore. Karen, bitter, arrogant, entitled, convinced that leadership was her divine right. She'd been on the board for years, not because she cared about the community, but because it fed her addiction to authority. The same way some people cling to gossip, except she clung to power. She saw the presidency as hers by inheritance. And when the neighbors started encouraging my wife to run instead, you could practically hear Karen's ego shatter from across the street. My wife didn't even want the job at first. She's kind, organized, a natural leader who never needed a clipboard to feel important. She hesitated for days, unsure she wanted to step into the snake pit the HOA had quietly become. But the community pushed, telling her she'd be a breath of fresh air, telling her she wasn't like Karen, telling her she had their trust. So she agreed. And the night she announced her candidacy, Karen's meltdown began. It started small, pathetic. The kind of behavior you see from someone trying to assert dominance over a room no one put them in charge of. Notice of violation for improper sidewalk chalk. A warning letter for unauthorized campaign flyers. Another notice, even pettier, claiming she failed to maintain appropriate demeanor toward HOA board members. We laughed at first, because how else do you react when a grown woman tries to weaponize smiling? But the laughter died when Karen escalated. She cornered my wife during a walk and hissed, "Drop out before things get messy. This neighborhood needs discipline, not whatever you think you represent." That was the first time I saw real fear flicker through my wife's eyes. Not fear of Karen, fear of what people become when they believe they're losing control. But my wife didn't back down. She kept campaigning. She knocked on doors. She talked to neighbors. She earned respect the real way. And every handshake was another nail in Karen's imaginary throne. That's when Karen shifted into full HOA cult mode. She started hosting secret board meetings nobody was invited to. She rewrote minor policies behind closed doors, then claimed they were long-standing rules. She filed violations against us at midnight. She walked past our house with a flashlight aimed directly at our windows, pretending to inspect drainage compliance. The more my wife rose, the more unhinged Karen became. And she didn't hide it. Her voice carried across the cul-de-sac. "I built this HOA. I run this HOA. And I will not be challenged by some newcomer who thinks she's special." She was unraveling fast, and everyone could see it. But none of us imagined she would go as far as creating her own fake enforcement unit. We underestimated her delusion. We underestimated her desperation. We underestimated how far a petty tyrant will go when she feels power slipping through her fingers. And here's where everything blew apart. Karen hired 2 men, not officers, not security professionals, just muscle with ego issues. She gave them fake uniforms, fake badges, fake authority, and real orders. Remove her from her rounds, shut her down, make her disappear from this election. She told them they were HOA security, and they believed her. They believed they had jurisdiction. They believed they could lay hands on my wife. They believed Karen owned this neighborhood. And that belief is what led them straight into my street, straight into my shadow, straight into the worst decision they would ever make. Karen didn't just crave power. She needed it the way parasites need a host. And once she realized the neighborhood no longer bowed to her clipboard throne, she built an HOA cult structure designed to force compliance through intimidation. It started with meetings where she sat at the head of the table like some petty monarch, slamming her gavel every time someone questioned her interpretation of the bylaws. She talked about order, discipline, obedience, words she used like weapons as she tried reshaping the HOA into a machine she alone controlled. But her real transformation happened when she created her so-called HOA security unit, a laughable attempt at power that turned dangerous the moment she found men desperate enough to obey her. She strutted around calling them officers, pretending the board approved their existence, waving around forged documents that looked official enough to fool someone who didn't know what actual enforcement paperwork looked like. But I knew. I read every policy, every clause, every line buried in the HOA charter. None of what she created was real. None of it was authorized. The signatures were fake. The authority was imaginary. The titles were stolen. And Karen Whitmore treated those forgeries like scripture. Emotional escalation sharpened when those two men began patrolling the neighborhood, walking around with cheap tactical vests and knockoff radios, stopping residents to advise them of compliance adjustments. People whispered, people feared, people avoided their own front yards, and Karen reveled in it. One neighbor told me Karen bragged about finally having enforcement muscle. Another said she overheard Karen telling the men, "Anyone who opposes me gets handled." A third admitted the fake officers followed her teenage son home from school because his skateboard looked suspiciously unauthorized. This wasn't HOA management. This was harassment dressed as governance. Villain behavior escalated again when Karen demanded all candidates, including my wife, submit daily schedules for safety monitoring. A clear intimidation attempt disguised as community oversight. She even sent a letter accusing my wife of instability because she smiled at residents too often, claiming it was manipulative behavior meant to sway votes emotionally. That was the moment I realized Karen's obsession had broken through whatever thin barrier separated petty annoyance from full-blown danger. But it got worse. Karen printed new signs labeling the two men as HOA Enforcement Division, a title that does not exist anywhere in the charter, state law, or even in the fantasies of most corrupt board members. The signs went up overnight. So did the fear. Neighbors whispered that Karen had given her fake cops permission to detain rule violators. Others said she was rewriting the bylaws to grant herself emergency authority if the election threatened community stability. And every rumor turned out to be true. I saw copies of her drafts. She was building a dictatorship with fountain pens and printer paper. One night I caught her outside our house, scribbling on a clipboard while staring directly at our windows. When I stepped out, she didn't even flinch. She just muttered, "Some people don't understand the weight of leadership." Then she smiled. The skin-crawling kind of smile that belongs to someone who thinks consequences don't apply to them. She was spiraling into something unstable, something desperate, something willing to break laws to regain control. And here's where everything blew apart. Karen called her fake officers into a closed-door meeting. Neighbors reported hearing shouting from inside, words like, "Remove her," "Shut her down," and "Force compliance." By morning, the two wannabe enforcers were standing at the edge of the cul-de-sac, waiting for my wife to begin her campaign rounds. They weren't hiding. They weren't nervous. They thought they were untouchable. They thought Karen's fake enforcement badges made them unstoppable. They thought the HOA belonged to them now. And that delusion is what led them to grab my wife, drag her across the pavement, and trigger the exact war Karen never expected to lose. When I dropped those 2 fake officers to the pavement and tore my wife out of their hands, the adrenaline wasn't what sharpened my focus. It was clarity. The kind that hits when you've seen real war and suddenly recognize the same pattern. Weak men following a corrupt leader who thinks authority is something you can forge on printer paper. As they lay there gasping, one clutching his shattered wrist and the other groaning against the bent hood of a car, I scanned their uniforms. It took me less than 2 seconds to confirm everything I already knew. None of this was legal. Their badges didn't have jurisdiction codes. Their patches didn't match the ones the county requires for security licensing. Their radios weren't programmed, just blinking lights on dead channels. One of them even had a manufacturer tag hanging from the vest under his arm. Everything on them was counterfeit. Everything on them screamed impersonation. And everything they touched, my wife included, was a crime. But that's not even the half of it. I found forged HOA documents stuffed in the vest pocket of the man still pinned under my boot. The papers claimed they were working under HOA Emergency Intervention Protocol, something that doesn't exist anywhere in the bylaws. Worse, the signature at the bottom looked like a child scribbling the word authority. It wasn't even close to the real board format. As I held the papers up, the man under my boot started shaking, terrified, because he knew exactly how bad this looked. "Karen signed it," he whispered. "She said it was approved. She said we were official." His voice broke on official. The other man, still slumped over the hood, lifted his head and croaked out the same thing. "Karen told us we had the right. She said anyone trying to take her presidency was a threat." Their confessions rolled out fast, desperate, panicked, because the sirens echoing down the street told them time had run out. Here's where everything blew apart. Deputies tore around the corner, lights blazing, engines screaming, the sound ricocheting across the cul-de-sac. When they saw the scene, my wife bruised, the uniforms fake, the car hood caved in. They reached for their holsters out of instinct, but froze when they realized the danger was already neutralized. The lead deputy stepped forward and took the papers from my hand. His brows narrowed instantly. He recognized the fraud. He recognized the counterfeit structure. And he recognized the kind of HOA abuse that turns into felony territory. "These aren't real," he said under his breath. "None of this is real." My wife stood beside me, voice trembling with fury as she explained what happened. The grabbing, the dragging, the threats, the impersonation. Her words hit like hammers. Deputies swarmed the fake officers, cuffing them, demanding answers. That's when the dam burst. "Karen made us do it," one sobbed. "She said your wife wasn't allowed to run." The other added, "She said the presidency was hers. She said if we didn't remove her, she'd fire us. She gave us the uniforms. She paid us. She said it was legal. Please, don't let her come near us." The deputies looked at each other with the kind of expression reserved for discovering organized corruption, because that's exactly what this was. An HOA mafia operation built on fraud, intimidation, and fake enforcement. Emotional escalation tightened as one deputy pulled out his tablet and accessed the HOA filings. He scrolled, stopped, scrolled again. His jaw clenched. "These bylaws were altered," he said. "Sections added. None of them recorded with the county." That was the final nail. The HOA president election paperwork had been tampered with. Karen had created a shadow government, a dictatorship disguised as neighborhood management. It was all unraveling, and it was unraveling fast. The deputy radioed it in. "Dispatch, we need a unit to detain HOA board member Karen Whitmore for questioning in an assault and impersonation case." And here's where everything blew apart again. Karen came storming down the sidewalk like she owned the street, floral blouse, fake confidence, and delusion radiating off her skin. But the moment she saw the ambulances, the deputies, the handcuffed men, the bruises on my wife, and me standing there calm and unmovable, her whole facade cracked. Fear flickered behind her eyes, then panic, then denial, and then the realization that her entire fabricated empire had collapsed in front of the neighborhood she tried to rule. Karen froze mid-stride the moment she saw the cuffs on her fake officers, her mouth hanging open like someone had snatched the script she'd rehearsed for years right out of her hands. She tried recovering her posture, tried straightening her shoulders, tried pulling that same smug authority she'd weaponized against this neighborhood for so long. But none of it landed. Not when the deputies turned toward her with cold eyes. Not when her two hired parasites pointed at her like she was the devil incarnate. Not when the entire street stepped out onto porches to watch the collapse of the HOA dictator who had ruled them with petty fines and midnight stalking. Karen's voice shook as she tried to force out her old dominance. "What is going on here? They were supposed—" She choked off the words when one deputy raised a hand, stopping her like she was a child interrupting adults. His expression didn't budge. "Karen Whitmore?" he said. She blinked hard, trying to understand how fast the world had turned against her. "Yes," she said, trying to regain her tone. The deputy didn't let her. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit assault, impersonation of law enforcement through hired agents, harassment, election interference, and distribution of falsified HOA authority documents." Every charge hit her like a hammer. Her knees wobbled, her face drained. For the first time, she looked small, but that's not even the half of it. Karen burst into a screaming fit, flailing her arms, denying everything, pointing at me and my wife like we had fabricated the entire mess. "They're lying!" she shrieked. "This is HOA business. I am the HOA, you hear me? I run this community." The deputy stepped closer with a calm that sliced her meltdown in half. "Not anymore," he said. Those two words shattered her. The neighborhood gasped. Some neighbors covered their mouths. A few recorded openly, the same way victims of a bully record the moment the bully finally gets dragged away. Karen tried lunging toward my wife, but the deputies grabbed her arms and spun her around so fast she stumbled. The cuffs snapped around her wrists with a metallic finality that echoed off every stucco wall on the block. Her scream ripped out again, high and jagged, echoing down the street like the death cry of a collapsing kingdom. Here's where everything blew apart. The two fake officers, who minutes earlier smirked while dragging my wife across the pavement, began sobbing for real. "Karen made us do it!" one cried, as deputies loaded him into the cruiser. "She said the presidency was hers. She said we had to take her out of the race." The other nodded furiously, snot and tears dripping onto the grass. "We didn't want to grab her. She said she'd fire us. She said she'd ruin us if we didn't." Neighbors began whispering. Some stepped closer. Others exchanged looks of disgust, shock, and relief. For the first time in years, you could feel the collective realization that the HOA tyrant they'd feared was nothing more than a fragile coward who hid behind threats and forged documents. Karen kept screaming, "You idiots, shut up, shut up!" One deputy warned her to stay silent. She didn't listen. She never did. She twisted, thrashed, kicked at the ground, her face blotchy, her hair slipping out of its usual tight control as she yelled about loyalty, power, and how she held this neighborhood together. No one believed her anymore. No one obeyed. No one looked afraid. In fact, the silence from the neighbors carried something far worse for Karen. Clarity. They saw her exactly as she was, a parasite who built a fake empire out of fear. A surveillance creep who hid behind clipboards, a petty dictator who forged enough documents to choke a paper shredder. and now she was exposed in the middle of the street for everyone to witness. The deputies marched her to the cruiser. Her feet dragged, her voice cracked. Her final attempt at dominance came out as a shriek. "This neighborhood is nothing without me! Nothing!" The deputy opened the door. She tried one last pathetic twist to avoid going inside, but he guided her down with a firm, controlled push. The door slammed. The whole neighborhood jumped. The cruiser pulled away slowly. Karen's face smashed against the glass, her screams fading behind flashing lights. But the spectacle wasn't finished. The neighbors turned to my wife. Some approached her with wide eyes. Some whispered thank you. Some simply stared at the bruises on her arms and the calm in her stance. They realized she had never been the threat. She had been the solution. And the woman who tried to destroy her had just been exposed, arrested, humiliated, dismantled in the most public way possible. And still, the story wasn't over. Not for Karen. Not for the HOA cult she tried to build. Not for the neighborhood she terrorized. And definitely not for what was coming next. Karen Whitmore's downfall did not arrive with a whisper. It arrived with a courtroom packed full of neighbors who'd spent years swallowing her petty punishments and silent threats. It arrived with deputies carrying binders thick enough to snap under the weight of her forged signatures. It arrived with 2 former fake officers standing before a judge, their voices trembling as they admitted everything she made them do. It arrived with a prosecutor laying out her crimes one by one, each charge slicing through the air like a blade Karen never saw coming. Conspiracy, assault by proxy, impersonation coordination, fraudulent alteration of governing documents, election interference, harassment escalation, unauthorized surveillance, creation of a false enforcement branch. Every accusation landed, every violation stuck, every lie she told came back sharpened. But that's not even the half of it. When the judge finally spoke, you could feel the entire room tense. Karen stared ahead, glassy-eyed, makeup cracking at the corners, her once fearsome clipboard queen persona drained down to the desperate shell of a tyrant who believed she could control a neighborhood with paperwork and paranoia. The judge's ruling was ice cold. 6 years, heavy restitution, community protections enacted immediately. Mandatory restrictions preventing her from serving on any board for the rest of her life. Karen's breath hitched, her shoulders collapsed. Her hands shook as deputies stepped to her sides. She whispered something. Maybe a plea, maybe a curse. Maybe the realization that she had never held real power at all. It didn't matter, because her downfall was complete, and the humiliation was public. The moment she was taken away, the courtroom exhaled. The neighbors who once feared her now watched her go with a clarity that only comes when a bully is finally silenced. And here's where everything blew apart in reverse. The HOA election happened, and my wife, bruised, steady, unbroken, won in a landslide. Not because she gossiped, not because she threatened, not because she manipulated. She won because the truth finally rose above Karen's lies. She won because the neighborhood wanted leadership, not dictatorship. She won because everyone saw what Karen's regime really was. A cult built on fear. My wife walked onto that podium, raised her head, and accepted the presidency with quiet strength. No gloating, no bragging, just resolve. I stood in the back, watching her reclaim the community Karen tried to poison. She looked at me once, just for a second. I didn't need words, neither did she. The neighborhood returned to peace in the days that followed. Violations stopped appearing like threats on doormats. Surveillance walks ended. People came outside again. Kids played in driveways without worrying about HOA warnings. The fear Karen built evaporated like smoke, but the memory of what she tried to do remained carved into the street where she sent fake cops to drag my wife away. And every time I walked past that spot, one truth settled deeper into my bones. You don't threaten my wife. You don't drag her across pavement. You don't lay hands on her. Not in my neighborhood. Not in my lifetime. Not ever. Karen learned that lesson too late. And when the final paperwork closed on her case, the entire HOA understood something she never did. HOA went dead silent.